My name is Eleanor, and I'm 71 years old, and 3 months ago, my own son stood in my kitchen, the kitchen I paid for, and told me I had until the end of the week to pack my things and leave. Let that sink in for a moment. My own son, the boy I raised alone after his father walked out when he was 4 years old, the boy I worked 2 jobs for, cleaning offices at 5 in the morning and waiting tables at night, just so he could have new shoes for school and never feel like the poor kid in class. That boy stood in front of me, in the house I bought with my own money, and told me I wasn't welcome anymore. But here's the thing nobody in my family knew, not even my son. I never told them everything, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why that silence turned out to be the smartest thing I ever did. I want to take you back a little so you understand how we got to that kitchen, to that moment. My son's name is Daniel. He's 38 now, an accountant, smart, hardworking, the kind of son other mothers used to brag to me about, except it was always the other way around. I was the one bragging about him. I raised him by myself in a small 2-bedroom apartment in Ohio. We didn't have much. I remember nights when I'd tell him we already ate dinner so he wouldn't feel bad eating the last of the soup. He never knew that. I made sure of it. When Daniel was 26, I had finally saved enough, after years of careful budgeting and a small inheritance from my own mother, to buy a house. Not a mansion, nothing fancy, just a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard and a porch swing I always dreamed of having. I bought it outright, no mortgage, because I have always hated owing anybody anything. The deed was in my name, Eleanor Marie Whitfield. Just me. Daniel was living with me at the time, saving up to start his own life, and I told him he could stay as long as he needed. No rent, no pressure. That's what mothers do. A few years later, he met Rachel. I want to be fair here, because I know how these stories usually go, and I don't want you to think I'm just another mother-in-law who hated her son's wife out of spite. That's not what this is. When I first met Rachel, I genuinely liked her. She was polite, she complimented my cooking, she asked questions about my life like she actually cared about the answers. For the first year, things were good, genuinely good. But people show you who they are slowly, in small moments, if you're paying attention. It started with little things. Rachel would rearrange my kitchen cabinets to make more sense without asking me. She'd tell Daniel, in front of me, that the house could use some updating, looking around like my home, the home I built with blood and sweat and sleepless nights, was something embarrassing to be fixed. Daniel would just laugh it off. "Mom doesn't mind, right, Mom?" And I'd smile and say of course not, because what else does a mother say when she doesn't want to start a fight over cabinets? Then Daniel and Rachel got married, and they moved into the house permanently. I welcomed them with open arms. I'd even offered to redo one of the bedrooms into a proper guest space for when Rachel's parents visited, because I wanted everyone to feel comfortable. I thought we were building a family under one roof, the old-fashioned way, the way it used to be before everyone scattered across the country and grandparents became strangers their grandkids saw twice a year. I was wrong about what we were building. About 2 years into their marriage, Rachel got pregnant. I was overjoyed. I pictured myself rocking a grandbaby on that porch swing, reading bedtime stories, baking cookies that left flower handprints on tiny overalls. But somewhere during that pregnancy, something in Rachel shifted. Or maybe it had always been there, and I just hadn't let myself see it. She started saying things like, "This is our house now, Daniel. We need to start making decisions for our family. Our house, not my house that I generously let them live in. Our house," as if I were the guest. I remember one dinner clearly. We were sitting around the table I had bought 15 years ago, and Rachel set down her fork and said, "Eleanor, I think once the baby comes, we should talk about turning your room into a nursery. There's a really nice senior community not far from here. Very affordable, lots of women your age. You'd have your own little place, your own friends. It could be really good for you. A senior community. She was suggesting I move out of my own house into a retirement home so my unborn grandchild could have my bedroom. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something, anything. He just stared at his plate and mumbled, "We don't have to decide anything right now. Not Mom, this is her house. Not Rachel, that's not okay." Just silence, dressed up as diplomacy. That was the first crack, but I told myself it was hormones, pregnancy stress, a passing comment. I told myself a lot of things over the next 2 years to keep peace in my own home. The baby came, a beautiful girl named Sophie, and for a while, things softened. I helped with everything, diaper changes at 3 in the morning, pediatrician appointments, sleepless nights when Sophie had colic and Rachel was too exhausted to function. I genuinely believe, even now, that I was a good grandmother, a good mother-in-law, a good woman trying her best to hold her family together. But somewhere in Sophie's second year, Rachel's mother, a woman named Linda who lived 2 states away, started visiting more often. And every time Linda visited, I noticed small things changing after she left. New rules in the kitchen, comments about how I did things the old way, whispered conversations between Rachel and Daniel that stopped the second I walked into a room. One afternoon, I came home from the grocery store and found moving boxes in the hallway, my hallway, labeled Eleanor's room in Rachel's handwriting. I stood there holding a bag of apples, staring at those boxes, my heart absolutely pounding. I found Daniel in the garage. "What is this?" I asked him, trying to keep my voice steady. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "Mom, we need to talk." We sat down in the living room, the 3 of us, Rachel with Sophie on her hip like a shield. Daniel cleared his throat and said the words I will never forget as long as I live. "Mom, Rachel and I think it would be best for the family if you moved into your own place, somewhere smaller. We love you, but this house needs to work for our family now. Sophie's getting older, we want to expand, maybe have another baby, and honestly, Mom, you and Rachel butt heads a lot, and I'm tired of being stuck in the middle. We think some space will be good for everyone." I sat there in complete shock. I asked him directly, "Daniel, do you understand whose house this is?" And Rachel, not Daniel, Rachel answered for him. "Eleanor, we know it's technically your house, but Daniel's lived here for over a decade. He's contributed to bills, to repairs, to taxes. This is our home too. It's not fair to keep treating it like you're the only one with a say. Technically my house, like ownership, was just a technicality, a minor inconvenience standing between her and the life she wanted. I want you to understand something about me. I am not a woman who raises her voice. I did not scream. I did not cry in front of them, though God knows I wanted to. I simply stood up, smoothed my skirt, and said, I see. Give me some time to think." That night, I lay awake in my own bed, in my own house, feeling like a stranger in my own life. And that's when something inside me, something that had been quiet and patient for years, finally woke up. Because here is the part nobody in my family knew, the part I had never told Daniel, not out of deception, but because the timing never felt right, and honestly, because some old habits of self-protection just stick with you after a hard life. 15 years ago, when I bought that house, I didn't just buy it for myself. I set it up through a living trust, something my late husband's brother, a retired lawyer, had insisted on after watching too many families fight over property when someone passed away or things went sideways. The house was legally owned by the Eleanor Marie Whitfield Family Trust, with me as the sole trustee, controlling every decision about that property, completely separate from any verbal promises, family arrangements, or assumptions anyone had made over the years about who would inherit what or when. Daniel didn't know this. He assumed, like a lot of adult children assume, that someday the house would just become his, automatically, like gravity. Rachel certainly assumed it too, probably counted on it, probably already had her future kitchen renovation pinned somewhere. But assumptions aren't legal documents, and I controlled every single decision about that trust. For the next several days, I played along. I told Daniel I needed time to look at apartments, that I understood, that maybe he and Rachel were right, maybe it was time for a change. I watched the relief wash over his face, and honestly, that hurt more than the eviction itself. He was relieved to be getting rid of me. I want to pause here and tell you something important, because this story isn't just about revenge. It's about what happens when you've spent your whole life sacrificing for people who eventually decide you're inconvenient. I started quietly meeting with my brother-in-law, the lawyer, going over the original trust documents, confirming every detail was airtight. I learned something during those meetings that changed everything, something I hadn't fully processed until I saw it written in black and white. Because the trust was structured the way it was, with very specific successor clauses, Daniel wasn't even automatically the heir to that property if certain conditions weren't met before my passing. The conditions involved things like maintaining a respectful familial residence agreement, something my late husband's brother had insisted on including, almost prophetically, in case family dynamics ever changed. In plain English, if Daniel and his family forced me out of my own home against my wishes, he could legally forfeit any future claim to that property entirely, and the trust would redirect to an alternate beneficiary. I sat in that lawyer's office and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power, not the petty kind, the quiet, steady kind that comes from finally understanding you are not as powerless as people have convinced you to be. A week later, Daniel came to me with moving brochures for senior apartments, practically gift-wrapped, like he was doing me a favor. "Mom, I found a few places, really nice ones, close enough that we can visit on weekends." I smiled and said, "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart. But before we talk about that, I think it's time we all sat down together and talked about the house properly. All of it." Rachel rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes, and said, "Eleanor, we don't need a whole production about this." I looked at her calmly and said, "Oh, I think you do." That weekend, I invited Daniel, Rachel, and surprisingly, my brother-in-law the lawyer, to sit down at the dining table. Rachel looked annoyed that an outsider was joining what she clearly thought was a simple family conversation about getting rid of the inconvenient old woman. My brother-in-law laid out the trust documents on the table. He explained, in calm, professional language, exactly how the property was owned, exactly what conditions existed, and exactly what would happen if I were forced out of my primary residence against my will by family members currently living there. I watched the color drain from Daniel's face in real time. Rachel, to her credit, recovered first, snapping, "This is ridiculous. You can't just threaten to disinherit your own son over a disagreement about living arrangements." I said, very calmly, "Disagreement? Rachel, you put moving boxes in my hallway labeled with my name before anyone had a real conversation with me. You told me, in my own home, and I needed to start packing by the end of the week. That is not a disagreement. That is an eviction." Daniel finally found his voice. "Mom, we weren't trying to evict you. We were trying to." "You were trying to take my house," I said, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, my voice cracked, not from weakness, but from years of held-back hurt finally surfacing. "Daniel, I gave up everything for you. I worked 2 jobs so you'd never feel poor. I bought this house with money I saved $1 at a time for 15 years. And the moment your wife decided I was inconvenient, you didn't defend me. You handed me brochures for old folks' homes like I was a problem to be managed. The room went silent. Sophie, who was playing nearby with blocks, looked up, sensing the tension the way children always do. Rachel tried one more time. This isn't about Eleanor being inconvenient. It's about boundaries, about our family having autonomy in our own home. It is not your home, I said, finally letting every ounce of restraint go. It has never been your home. You have lived in my generosity for years, and instead of gratitude, I got disrespect. I got cabinets rearranged without asking. I got comments about my house needing updating. I got suggestions that I move into senior housing so my own grandchild could have my bedroom. I tolerated all of it because I love my son and I wanted to keep this family together. But there is a difference between humility and being erased, and I refuse to be erased in my own home. I turned to Daniel. I am not kicking you out tonight. I am not that cruel, and Sophie deserves stability. But understand this clearly. This house belongs to me, controlled entirely by trust you have no authority over, and going forward, decisions about this home will be made by me, with respect, or not at all. If you ever again try to force me out of my own house, you will lose any future claim to it permanently. That is not a threat, Daniel. That is simply the truth, written into legal documents that exist whether you like them or not. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, with a tearful apology and a happy resolution, but real life rarely wraps up that neatly, and what happened next was something none of us saw coming. About 3 weeks after that dining table confrontation, Rachel's mother Linda showed up unannounced, and what I discovered that day shook me more than anything Rachel had ever said to my face. I was in the kitchen when I overheard Linda and Rachel talking in the backyard, voices low but carrying through the open window. Linda was saying, "I told you, you should have gotten Daniel to convince her to add your name to the deed years ago, before she got suspicious. Now she's got lawyers involved. This is a mess." Rachel sighed. "I tried, Mom. She's stubborn. I figured once the baby came she'd soften up, want to leave us the house eventually anyway. I didn't think she'd actually fight back like this." My hands were shaking as I stood there listening. This hadn't been a spontaneous disagreement about living space. This had been calculated, planned, possibly for years. Rachel hadn't just wanted comfort or boundaries. She had been quietly working an angle to get her name on my property the entire time, with her mother's encouragement, and when that didn't work, she escalated to simply pushing me out entirely. That was the first real twist, though at the time it felt less like a twist and more like a gut punch, the realization that the woman who had smiled at my dinner table for years had been calculating my displacement the whole time. But the second twist came just 2 days later, and this one came from somewhere I'd never expected. Daniel showed up at my door alone, without Rachel, late on a Tuesday evening, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I almost didn't let him in, honestly, still raw from everything. But he stood on my porch and said, "Mom, please, I need to tell you something, and I don't want Rachel to know I'm here." I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had unraveled weeks earlier, and Daniel put his head in his hands and said something that changed the entire shape of this story. "Mom, Rachel's been talking to a divorce lawyer." I sat back, stunned. "What?" "Not because of us fighting," he continued, his voice breaking. "Because of the house. I found documents in her email, Mom. She's been talking to someone about how property division would work if we divorced after living here long enough, about residency rights, about whether staying in this house for a certain number of years could somehow strengthen a claim during a divorce settlement, regardless of whose name is on the trust." My stomach turned. "Daniel, what are you saying?" He looked at me, eyes red. "I think Rachel's whole plan was never really about wanting a bigger house or more privacy. I think part of her wanted to establish enough legal residency here that if our marriage ever fell apart, she could fight for rights to stay in the house, or at least leverage it in a settlement, especially with Sophie involved. Pushing you out wasn't just about comfort, Mom. It was about control, about making sure that if anything ever happened between us, she wasn't the one who had to leave. I sat there absorbing this, feeling sick, feeling betrayed not just as a mother but as a human being who had welcomed this woman into her family with open arms. This was the second twist, and it recontextualized everything. Rachel's coldness toward me hadn't simply been about wanting her own space. It had been strategic, calculated, treating our family home as a chess piece in a marriage she might already have been preparing to exit, using me as the convenient casualty along the way. I asked Daniel the question that mattered most. Do you still love her? He was quiet for a long time before answering. I don't know anymore, Mom. I know I love Sophie. I know I let things go too far with how she treated you because I was tired of being in the middle, and that was wrong of me. I should have protected you from the start. I won't pretend that apology fixed everything instantly. Years of feeling secondary in my own home don't heal in one conversation. But it was a start, a real one, the first time my son had truly seen me, not as an obstacle to his marriage, but as his mother who deserved respect. Over the following weeks, things in the house grew tense in a different way. Daniel began pulling back from Rachel's plans, started asking harder questions, started actually defending me when Rachel made comments. Rachel noticed the shift immediately and grew increasingly frustrated, increasingly desperate, which led to the third twist, the one I genuinely did not see coming. One evening, about 2 months after that first confrontation, Rachel came to me alone while Daniel was out walking Sophie in the stroller. She sat down across from me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely vulnerable instead of calculating. Eleanor, I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually listen, not judge me yet. I crossed my arms but stayed quiet, waiting. My father left my mother when I was 12, she said. He didn't just leave emotionally, he left financially too, took everything, left us with nothing, and we ended up moving in with my grandmother into her house, and within 2 years, my grandmother's new husband convinced her to push my mother and me out, said we were a burden, said it was time we got our own place even though we had nowhere to go. I watched my mother lose everything twice in 1 decade because she never had her name on anything, never had legal protection, never had any security beyond someone else's good graces. Her voice cracked. When I married Daniel and we moved in here, all I could think about was making sure that never happened to me, that if anything ever went wrong with Daniel, with anything, I wouldn't be the one left with nothing again. I know how that sounds now. I know I went about it the wrong way. I know I treated you horribly, like an obstacle instead of a person, and I am ashamed of that. But Eleanor, I was so scared of repeating my mother's life that I became exactly the kind of person who hurt people to protect myself. This was the third twist, not a twist of plot exactly, but a twist of understanding, the kind that complicates a villain into a human being, the kind that makes a true story messier and more honest than a simple revenge tale. I sat with that confession for a long time before responding. Rachel, I understand fear. I understand what it's like to feel like you have nothing and no one. Believe me, I lived that for years as a young single mother. But fear doesn't excuse cruelty. You could have talked to me. You could have asked me directly about security, about the future, instead of scheming behind my back and trying to push me out of my own home like I was disposable. She nodded, tears falling freely now. I know. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just needed you to understand why. I won't tell you that conversation magically fixed our relationship. It didn't. Trust, once broken that deeply, takes a long time to rebuild if it rebuilds at all. But it shifted something. It turned Rachel from a villain in my mind into a flawed, frightened woman who had made terrible choices out of old wounds she'd never properly healed. Here's where the story takes its final turn, the one I promised you at the beginning, the karma, the payback, though it didn't look exactly like the revenge fantasy you might be expecting. About 4 months after everything came to a head, I made a decision. I called another family meeting, this time calmer, more deliberate. I sat Daniel and Rachel down and told them I had thought long and hard about the future of the house, the trust, and our family. I told them I was not going to disinherit Daniel. I was not going to kick anyone out. But I was going to make significant changes to the trust structure, changes that protected everyone, including Sophie's future, while also finally protecting myself. I restructured the trust so that I retained full lifetime rights to the house, completely irrevocable, meaning no one, under any circumstances, could ever again suggest, pressure, or maneuver me out of my own home for as long as I lived. After my passing, the house would go into a structure that protected it specifically for Sophie's future education and stability, managed by a neutral trustee, regardless of what happened in Daniel and Rachel's marriage, meaning it could never become a bargaining chip in a divorce, could never be leveraged by either of them individually, only preserved for my granddaughter's future. I looked at both of them and said, this house was built on sacrifice. My sacrifice. I will not let it become a weapon in anyone's marriage or a tool for anyone's manipulation, ever again. But I also will not abandon this family. I am choosing to protect this house, and through it, protect Sophie's future, while making absolutely sure that no one, including either of you, can ever try to push me out of my own life again. Daniel cried, actually cried, something I hadn't seen him do since he was a little boy. He apologized again, more sincerely this time, for letting things go as far as they did, for choosing silence over protecting his own mother. Rachel, to her credit, didn't argue. She simply nodded and said, that's fair, Eleanor. That's more than fair. It's been almost a year now since that dinner table confrontation that started it all. Things aren't perfect. Rachel and I will probably never be as close as I once hoped we could be, but there's a new respect between us now, earned the hard way, built on hard truths instead of polite pretending. Daniel checks in with me daily now, really checks in, not just performative phone calls. He defends me when it matters. He finally understands what it cost me to give him the life he had, and he no longer takes it for granted. And Sophie, my sweet granddaughter, still doesn't know any of this happened. To her, I'm just Grandma, the one who reads her bedtime stories on the porch swing I always dreamed of having, the one whose bedroom she's not allowed to touch because, as I gently explained to her once, some things in life, sweetheart, you protect because they took a lifetime to build. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Never assume that just because you've given everything to someone, they won't try to take more. Protect yourself, quietly, legally, completely, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Love your family with your whole heart, but never, ever hand over your security in the process. Because the people who truly love you will respect your boundaries, and the ones who don't will show you exactly who they are, eventually, given enough time. I'm 71 years old, and I finally feel, for the first time in years, completely at peace in my own home. Not because I won some petty war against my daughter-in-law, but because I finally remembered something I'd forgotten somewhere along the way through all those years of sacrifice. I matter too.